Well, everybody, you are in for a treat today. I have been learning so much from this person already, and I can't wait. Welcome, Val, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. I am so excited to be on your show today.
Well, I've really been looking forward to this because over the years, I have had the opportunity to sell thousands and thousands of potted amaryllis and bulbs and things like that. And I always feel like, a lot of these companies mass produce things, but I think it'd be so great if people could put their own personal spin and creating, bulb gardens and things like that. And I'm just excited to dig into this. So, Val, why don't you start at the beginning and tell us how in the world did you get into our flower world?
Well, it actually all started back in hmm, probably 1990 when I talked my husband into agreeing to move to the country outside of Lexington, Kentucky, because I wanted to live on what I would think of as a farm. I grew up in the suburbs of Denver, and I adored my grandmother, and she had a big flower garden. So, of course, I wanted to grow flowers. And when we moved to the country in 1990, everything grew here because it's an old farm and the soil is fabulous.
Wow.
And I started growing flowers. And then in 94, I went to White Flower Farm up in Connecticut and saw Oriental lilies there for the very first time. And I came back with this harebrained notion that I wanted to try to grow Oriental lilies on the side because I was working in corporate America full time. And I wanted to talk our best friend, Charlie Hendricks, who was a retired firefighter, into doing that with me. So in 1997, we ordered a bunch of Oriental lilies retail from White Flower Farm and planted them. Didn't do well. And in 98, we got more lilies, like 1,000, and planted them out in a field that had tobacco in it. We ended up getting virus in them
Oh,
and
no.
failed. So we got a little bit more serious than the next year.
So it took you a couple of years just to perfect that art.
Yeah, to even get started because I was overcomplicating it because lilies are not difficult to grow. But I was overstudying. They'll rot if they're wet. So what did we do? We planted them deep, put a whole bunch of mulch over them, watered the heck out of them, and surprise, they rotted. So it took us a few years to learn about it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So then tell us, okay, so from those humble beginnings, because first of all, I gotta say this. I don't know many people that usually start with lilies. They usually bring them on later on. So that was ambitious.
Well, that shows you we didn't know what we didn't know.
Yes.
Because I had seen them and I just loved them. And I didn't see them, around Lexington. I didn't see them growing. And in my original discussion with Charlie in 97, when this is bourbon country, Charlie loves bourbon. So to talk him into doing this with me, I overserved him. When he finally said, "What is it that you want to do?" And I said, "I want to try to grow the kinds of flowers that could stop people in their tracks." And so I always say I was drinking, obviously, too, but we always wanted to grow something just really special. And to me, lilies were really special. We just didn't realize that we should have started off with zinnias or something.
Well, probably after doing that, everything seemed easier. So, that's funny. But even like you said, lilies are not hard. So once you know a few things. Well, let's get back to your business. So Three Toads Farm. I love this name. How? Give us a little more background. I can't wait to hear this.
It's sheer coincidence that we came up with that name. When my husband and I moved to our farm, which we have 5.5 acres just outside of Lexington, it's an old family farm that we're the first people outside the family to live here.
Oh, wow.
And so it had been called the Estes Farm. Well, that wasn't going to work, but it was at least called the farm. So I wanted to call it something, and we would sit on our big front porch in the summer when we moved here and thinking of names. And his name's Daryl, my name's Val. So we're thinking Val Dare. Oh, that's so good. And finally, one night, because we have a lot of toads, which is a sign of health,
Yeah.
and the toads are all up on the porch. We're having a cocktail, and I always liked White Flower Farm, how that sounds, White Flower Farm. And so by sheer coincidence, we said Three Toads Farm, because threes are odd numbers. A lot of people plant in threes, arrange
Yeah.
in threes. Um, and so that's how we came up with Three Toads Farm. That has turned out to be a great name by sheer coincidence, because it's unique. It's a little goofy, but it's not, I guess, over the top goofy. And it's just been a great name for us. And there's actually, three of us that are involved with it. So another coincidence.
That is so amazing. Yes, it's prophetic almost to have three and then have three people
It,
involved in it. Yeah.
it is. It is. And then I had a landscaper who I knew had a degree in art, and she did our logo. And then that turned out to be perfect too. So we learned a lot about branding along the way, which I learned from the ASCFG when I joined that after we had failed at growing lilies for a couple of years. I joined the Association of Specially Cut Flower Growers, and in 2000, and went to see Frank and Pamela Arnowski's farm in Texas.
Yes.
And they talked so much about branding that I came back, and then we made sure that everybody buying from Three Toads Farm knew who they were buying from.
Wow. Okay. So there's another topic that we might have to talk about. Okay. So you started off with lilies and
Yeah.
then grew to, I mean, did you sell at markets? Did you sell to flower shops? What was that business like?
We started off selling at the Lexington Farmers Market in 1998. And it's a great market because Lexington is a college town, but we're also surrounded with the horse community.
Mm,
And so we have all kinds of customers. But one of the things that we found out is that people care about great flowers. And so we were always the high end at the market, because we bought the largest bulbs commercially available, which is a big, one of the secrets to our success. And that applies to everything that we do, like the Amaryllis and things like that. But when you get the biggest bulbs, you get the biggest show. And so we started out with people buying our lilies at $4 a stem, which was so crazy. It was so scary to be that high, but we made sure that all of the anthers are picked off, that they are spotless. And then we worked up to $7 to $9 a stem.
wow.
People care about great flowers. And if somebody came along at the market, usually women, and they would say, oh, that's just too much. I can't afford that. And so I would give them a lily. I never sold it cheaper. I would give it to them and tell them just to cut off the different blooms, put them around their house, and for less than $10, they could fill their home with fragrance. And then they were hooked.
Wow. I've never heard that technique about getting them hooked, but I love that idea. Well, I mean, just because sometimes, people have to see it to believe it, and they're used to getting flowers other places or from other sources, and it's just not the same. It is just not the same.
It is
Well,
not the same. And we helped other growers in the market who had lilies. They weren't growing big bulbs, which some of them never did. I mean, they never grew the size bulbs that we have, but we encouraged them to make sure they presented them really well, like pull off all those anthers with that pollen, because nobody wants that mess.
right.
And especially dealing with white lilies. So the minute we could get our fingers in there as the buds started to open and pull them off, it would protect the flower, and they were so gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I've sold a few lilies over the years, and yes, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, I really would like to kind of chat a little bit more about maybe some tips for growing lilies, because I know a lot of people, maybe when they see the investment, when they, bulbs can be a scary thing because sometimes that's hard to see. Well, if I pay this much for a bulb, am I going to get the return? And then like you have already shared some great tips. So I'm just kind of, could you kind of walk us through the lily growing process? Just kind of overview it.
Sure,
Yeah.
because we learned along the road. That first year we sold at the farmer's market, I cut the lilies really short. And we actually put them, I mean, they were like maybe 8 or 10 inches on the stems because I was trying to protect the bulb so that it could regenerate and, produce more lilies next year. And this guy came up to me at the market and he goes, honey, what are you doing? Why aren't you cutting these long? And I said, well, because I want them to be able to bloom next year. And I was telling this sad story and he goes, cut them longer and sell them for more. So that was a good tip too. But we started out growing them like everybody, just out in the field. And so they all bloom when lilies bloom. And so when we were successful with that, we said, let's see if we can, we could sell them before they would be blooming outside and maybe have them bloom a little bit longer. So we started forcing them in my greenhouse. I have an old 20 by 20 Lord and Burnham greenhouse. And so we tried to force them in there to extend the season, which didn't quite work because we didn't know about lighting, that they need lights. And so we were trying to actually have them for the holidays. And so they're growing along, they're producing great buds, then they turn brown and they fall off. So we learned about lighting. But once we started putting lights in the greenhouse, then we could force them after the season. And so then we tried to see if we could get them before the season. And same thing, we started them in the greenhouse and then moved them to our basement, our scary old house basement, to hold them. And then we cut them and took them to the market, and that worked too. And that was when we said, okay, let's get a greenhouse. And so we bought a $35,000 Stuppies greenhouse. Okay, so there's a couple of tips for forcing lilies.
Okay.
And we actually got them year round, and they come in frozen because they think it's wintertime.
Okay,
and that's how they can keep lilies so that we could get them year round. So what we would do then is we would start them in, and we grew them in gallon pots to begin with. Every single lily was in its own gallon pot, planted at the bottom of the pot because they don't need a lot of roots underneath them, but they grow roots up through the root stem. Mm-hmm. And we would actually we'd start them either in the cooler, so it would stay cool longer, and then we would move them to the greenhouse, under the bench, and then on top of the bench, which we found out we didn't really need to do that. So we didn't, same thing like with spring bulbs. When I force spring bulbs, I really don't need to put them under any benches. They are fine going right into the sunshine. But so my first tip is get the largest bulbs that you can afford. And then the second tip is to start them someplace a little bit cooler if you can, because you want to mimic the conditions of them waking up from wintertime, starting to grow. And then they don't like it when it's super, super, super hot. And so you can keep them, you could grow them on someplace outdoors if you wanted to, that gets a little bit of shade, because they like it in shade as well. We did not keep our lilies to rebloom the following year. We did that at the beginning when we were just growing them outside. And so again, the next year they all bloom all at once. And what we're trying to do is stagger those blooms so that we could keep selling them. And that was when we also learned that we needed, as I mentioned, we need lighting. And so we didn't use fancy lights in the greenhouse. We just used lights hanging from strings with pie pans over them. And that was enough light for us. But they do need a lot of light. And then we also fertilize them with just like 10, 10, 10. And that's kind of how we grow lilies.
Wow. And then how long does it usually take? I mean, I've actually forced Easter lilies, but it's been so long, I don't even remember. So how long does it usually take from you put that bulb in the dirt till you can cut it?
It's a great question, Scott. It depends on the kind of lily that you're forcing.
Okay.
If you're forcing an Easter lily or an Asiatic lily, those are the first ones that typically bloom in the summertime. So they're going to take less time to force. And if you're forcing one of the Oriental trumpets, also called OTs, which is a great lily because it's fragrant, huge blooms, they're going to take a little bit longer. And then the Oriental lilies, of course, the queens of the late summer garden, left to their own devices, they're going to take a little bit longer. And it also depends on the time of year. So it takes longer to force them in the fall and in the winter than it would in the height of summer when it's warm. It could take for us, 120 days. Sometimes they would take longer as well. But that's right around as long as it would take, maybe sometimes 130 days.
Okay, so it's not. I mean, it's not any different than some crops that are being grown. So
Exactly.
and you get great dollar value. Which was more popular for you, like the colors of the Asiatics or that fragrance of the Orientals, or as far as when you sold them?
Fragrance. Now there are, and we kind of made our claim to fame on some fragrance too. Now, not everybody likes lilies. My mother, for example, was allergic to the smell. That's fine. So the Oriental trumpets and the Orientals are by far the most fragrant. The Asiatics are typically the least fragrant. But we didn't like the Asiatic as a cut flower because the petals were very fragile, would fall off. Now they're great garden performers. So when we sell bulbs, which we would sell in the spring and in the fall, because that's when you should be planting lilies, the ones we would sell in the spring would include an LA, like the longiform Easter lily and the Asiatic, because that way people could extend the bloom time, in their own gardens. And last year, I grew tiger babies here at the farm, which almost looks like the Martagon lily.
Oh yeah.
I love, and they're the great apricot, and they are actually an Asiatic lily. So I'm planting a lot more of them too, because they are just gorgeous. But typically we would only grow an LA to sell for spring bulbs beginning of March. And then we would plant out the rest of those, and we would probably sell them as a plant, because anything that we had growing in a gallon pot, and we had transitioned by that time to grow them in crates because it was just easier. But anything that we would grow in a gallon pot, then we would sell at the market when it was in bud. And
Oh,
so people
okay.
at home, plant them in their yard, and they bought more lilies from us, cut lilies, if they had them growing in their yard than if they weren't growing any lilies, because they would never cut their own.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
It's crazy.
We're talking about bulbs here, and I have to confess, I know you've been and I'm probably going to get this not correct, but the regional head for the Southeastern ASCFG area,
Right.
and I live in that area, so that's when I first got to see your name, because I'd see, oh, she's my rep, or she's my district leader and all that, and I always thought that was really great. And then I noticed that you had a course on the Gardener's Workshop with Lisa Ziegler, and was that new this year? Was that a new thing?
Yes. She asked me last year if I would consider doing a course on how to force and how to design with and everything about holiday bulbs. And I was so excited because up till now, I've been trying to get more of the commercial cut flower growers to also do holiday bulbs, because I think it's a great shoulder market for so many of them, after they're done with summer, if that didn't kill them, to make money going into the holidays too. So I thought that was a great opportunity. But Lisa asked if I would do something that targets home gardeners and also applies to the commercial growers. And so I was, of course, really excited because I adore her. I was so fortunate to serve on the board of the ASCFG with her. In fact, most of the time I sat beside her at our board meetings because I like her so much. And for her to ask me to do that was exciting. And so I decided, though, for the course that what I wanted to do was to show people. I don't want to do, just me talking. I don't want to do PowerPoint slides. I wanted to show them how I choose the bulbs I choose, what they look like, big giant bulbs versus little bitty bulbs that you get from every place else. I wanted to show them how to force them, whether they're forcing amaryllis from the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, which are different. And then I wanted to show them how I create tabletop bulb gardens, and that they, people can too, to give as gifts. And I also show them two dormant bulb gardens that I do as gifts that you can give to somebody for Christmas that they can open up after Christmas and then start growing, or that you can ship to loved ones over the holidays. So it was really exciting.
Wow.
But it was kind
Well,
of
that's a
crazy
lot.
too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I don't remember. I want to say maybe 6 years ago ish. I had a grower from South America approach me because they were a huge amaryllis grower, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, so you're growing amaryllis down there for bulbs to ship up here, and then you just mentioned that, which kind of triggered that for me, and I thought, okay, so what's the difference for people so they know what to ask for, and why does it matter? Where they come from?
That is great. And actually, those South Africans were the very first Southern Hemisphere ones I ever grew. But the difference, the reason to get bulbs that are from the Southern Hemisphere is that they will force much more quickly for the holidays than if you get bulbs from Holland, which is, the same hemisphere that we're in. And that's because, left to their own devices, if an amaryllis is perennial outside, which you have to be really warm for that, but it will normally grow, it'll normally bloom in the summer. And so when you get an amaryllis bulb from the Southern Hemisphere and you get it in November, it already thinks it's summertime, and
Oh, okay.
raring to start blooming. It'll probably be already growing, and it is really wanting to get growing and get blooming. If you get a bulb from Holland, which, same hemisphere that we're in, they aren't going to, left on their own, they're not going to be blooming until next summer. And that's why it takes, it's a little bit harder to get them to force. But if you give them lots of heat, amaryllis love heat, and don't overwater them, you'll get magnificent blooms, but it could easily be after the holidays, which is also a great time to have flowers in your home.
When isn't it a good time to have flowers in your home?
You are right.
Well, that's really interesting. So, okay, so that's one of the things they need to look for. Well, okay, so what other bulbs do you think about forcing for the holidays besides amaryllis?
I'm going to let me say one more thing. I forgot to mention the Southern Hemisphere bulbs. Sometimes when you buy them, they're going to say where they're from. Most of the time they don't. I personally like bulbs from Peru right now, but what they're gonna say is they're going to call them Christmas flowering. And so people can look for something that says Christmas flowering, and that's probably going to be a bulb that's from the Southern Hemisphere.
Okay.
Okay, so the other things that I love forcing for the holidays are paperwhites. And I know a lot of people hate the smell of paperwhites. And to say it's off-putting is putting it mildly to them.
Yeah.
And so what I did a few years, 10, 12 years ago, is I started forcing every kind of paperwhite I could find that there is, because I was on the hunt to find some that are not stinky, maybe something that still has a fragrance, but also something that's got a gorgeous bloom. And so for that, I like to force one that's called Nir, spelled N-I-R, or Nazareth. That paperwhite is less fragrant than those stinky old Zivas. And Ziva is a common one that you can get everywhere. And I'm a specially cut flower grower, so I want to grow something specialty. And that near paper white has bigger flowers, more stems, and is a little bit shorter typically. So that's a really good one. And then I also love one that's called Inbal, Inbal. That's the least fragrant of all of the paper whites. The only downside is that it does not like forcing in water. So if you like putting your paper whites on pebbles and then forcing them that way, it's not going to do as well. But those two are great. And so I grow both of those for the holidays.
Wow, that's a great tip. A lot of people don't realize though what you just said. It's so true because even with cut flowers, I would bring in cut paper whites out of Israel, and at one point because that was the only reason is because the varieties they grew were less fragrant, and I was wondering, there's so many different kinds of narcissus. Do you mix that up at all, or do you just stay with paper whites for the holidays?
I stay with paper whites for the holidays. I find
Okay.
that that's what people are wanting. There is one that I love forcing, and it's called, I believe it's called Grand du Soleil. And it is going to be, it takes longer to force. It doesn't have as many flowers because people like lots of flowers for the
Yeah.
holidays. And it has a fragrance that is like springtime, and it's yellow. So it's going to be a light yellow, which also doesn't work for a lot of people for the holidays. But that one
Right.
is a beautiful one. And you mentioned cut flowers. I wanted to say that an amaryllis, if it gets really tall, say, and it falls over, which sometimes happens, cut it off and put it in a vase with maybe magnolia branches or maybe some spruce from the yard. It lasts just as long as a cut flower as it does on the bulb. Same thing for paper whites. So if you don't really like that smell or somebody doesn't, then just cut them all off and put them in little tiny little vases around the house, and it won't be as pungent in one area.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, I love those suggestions. Do many growers, and I don't know, maybe it's just the margins or not, but do many people grow or force bulbs like amaryllis for cutting, or is it just you can make so much more money in gardens and pots?
It depends on what your market is. I don't sell them as cut flowers because I get the great big bulbs. Again, that's the secret. Great big bulbs, just like we did with the lilies. And I don't want to cut off one or two bulbs because I can't sell that as a plant then.
Right.
But there are a few growers, and there aren't very many, but they will grow them just as cut flowers. And then that's how they sell them.
Okay, so you mentioned big bulbs, and you've said that's a theme here.
Yes.
Always get the biggest bulbs.
Yep.
So let me ask this question, and we can maybe tie it back to lilies too. But with amaryllis, what is considered big?
The bulbs that I get, and I order them in February, for example, are size 36, 38 centimeters. Those are the ones that I like.
That is big.
And that's, yeah. And I get like I like different varieties because people like different varieties. This year I've got 1,200 coming if they all make it. But that 36, 38 centimeter amaryllis will just create a wow for anybody that you're selling it to. If you're selling it as just a bulb, or if you're selling it already about ready to bloom in a great container, people will pay more for the big bulbs. So sometimes speaking of containers, once the containers show up from outside the US to the facilities here, they may not have the big double white amaryllis that I had to have, because I have to have a double white, only is coming in at 30 centimeters, which isn't going to work. I mean, that's just too small. You're not going to get as many stems. I'd have to put 5 of them or 6 of them in a container versus 3 of them. And so I like to be able to switch it around if they let me know that they're not coming, so that maybe I can order something else. But I really, really like the big ones. I'll go to 34, 36s, and I have on those. But I really like, the big ones are worth the time and trouble to get.
and I know it's kind of late in the season, and I'm not sure what the availability would be out there, just with supply chains being kind of crazy this year. Um, and if you can't find that size, I know you said you don't want to plant more of them, but are they cheap enough to get the little bit smaller ones to even try some, or is it just better just to wait to get the big ones?
If somebody hasn't grown them before, or if they haven't done it very often, I would say get some experience forcing the bulbs. And so get smaller ones if you need to do that from your wholesaler. Don't go below 30. I mean, I don't go below 30 because these 36, 38 centimeter bulbs are only 2% of the amaryllis bulbs in the world at that size. So that
Wow.
made me want them even more when I heard that, because
Now
that's
you're
my
exclusive.
dollar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can get smaller ones. And I'd also suggest that people can get them from retail sources and try it that way, because your local nurseries are probably going to have big bulbs. And so I would, anybody listening, when this comes out, check your local nurseries. Don't buy from big box stores. Buy from people whose livelihoods depend on selling you great product. And so your local nurseries are going to have probably bigger bulbs, and it's going to cost you more, but give them a try. And if you pay 22, 20, they're probably going to be more this year because bulbs have gone up. But if you pay even 22, 24, you can grow that and then pot it up in a cool container and sell it for 60.
That's a great point. And and there's so many things going on in the world to drive these prices up a little bit, or a lot. But one of the things I wanted to ask too is, there's some, I don't know, I don't want to call them miniature, but there are some smaller varieties of amaryllis. And I'm thinking, and I may mispronounce this, but I've been mispronouncing it for years. It's like, I want to say Mariniques, or some of these spidery, kind of
Yeah,
cool, different
yeah,
colored ones.
yeah.
Do you ever do those? Because I can't imagine those bulbs are as big, since they're just they are a smaller stem.
Right. They are a smaller stem. I have not done those in recent years because I didn't think I had the market for it, but you probably do, because they look a little bit more like orchids. They're so pretty. And so I
Yeah.
would say somebody could definitely get those because they're less well known. So that's going to make you be more specialty. And I was thinking there are some of them called Cybister, but I could be
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. That's in the same family. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are, they would be great because you could put a couple of those bulbs in a great container, and um, and they send up lots of stems also, and they're just not as big, and they're more dainty, uh, and people would love those as well.
Well, you're right. They do kind of look like orchids a little bit, just
Yeah,
because they're such a different bloom.
yeah, maybe I should start
Well,
getting those.
huh?
I could start getting those.
I'm glad I could help you there. So
Okay.
yeah, it's so funny. Well, gosh, there's so many things we need to talk about, and it's a little time. But I do want to say, if you're interested in this topic, I would go to the Gardener's Workshop website, and the great thing about Val's course is it is offered on demand, so you can go ahead and get it. You don't have to wait. It is one of the shorter courses. It's a great value, and you have plenty of time to still make this happen for your holiday. So I want to get that plug in there for you guys. Um, okay, so I want to talk about, and you've and the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because of some of the things you just said about you know making, as a grower, standing out. There's so many people growing flowers right now, finding ways to differentiate yourself or to specialize in something. um I feel like I've heard in a few interviews and just kind of some rumblings out there a little bit, where people are starting to get concerned that there may be too many farmers, and they're worried about competition. And with your, years of experience, both personally and on the board of ASCFG, which, by the way, you are going to be, well, if you haven't heard, the new president elect of ASCFG. And so, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And so, anyway, I just want to, say, do you have thoughts on this topic? Because I feel like we have so much room for more people because the demand is there. But a lot of times people get scared or they don't know that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there is so much room for more growers. And when I look at just AFCFG numbers, when I became regional director like 5 years ago, I think we had about 1,000 members, and now we're at more than 3,000. And so that's a whole lot of new growers. Some people get concerned about the new people coming in because a lot of times, not a lot of times, sometimes new growers are scared and they're a little
Sure.
bit timid about pricing, and they're concerned about going into a market where there's all like a farmer's market where there's already other growers. And so they will come in cheap, which I think is the biggest mistake you will ever make, because it's so hard to raise your prices. And once you start, your brand becomes, oh, they're the cheap ones. Who wants to be known as cheap? You don't want to do that. You want to be
No.
known as something that people will pay for, and that they, I would say everybody should try to grow the kinds of flowers that should stop people in their tracks. And when we were at the market, we tried to encourage more growers to come to the market. Now, not vegetable farmers sometimes are, they're pretty lackadaisical. They will grow very common zinnias. They're going to grow sometimes sunflowers that aren't pollenless. They're not the ones that you get the most amount of money for. To me, they're not competition. People will buy from them, but that's not your competition. I believe a rising tide floats all boats. And when we can have at our market more flower growers there, then it becomes almost like a flower market, and you'll get a lot more
Yes.
people coming, because everybody grows a little bit different things. We don't grow everything that's out there. We like dahlias. Well, there's lots of dahlia growers. We grow peonies. People love peonies, and we have no trouble selling peonies. Um, there is more competition, and my strong encouragement is that anybody listening to this, if you aren't pricing your flowers where they should be, then I think you're making a mistake. If you are the cheapest or next to cheapest at the market, you are not doing yourself any favor at all.
No, it's so much work to then at the end of the year not have a return.
You're not going to have that return, and you're not going to be able to invest in perennials very well, or in something like big bulbs, because you're not going to get the return out of it. And so, like for us, Charlie, my partner, loved the farmer's market. So he was selling at the farmer's market, which I used to do too. But then I got to where I was selling to florists and designers. So I'm growing a different Lysianthus than he's growing. I'm growing different zinnias than he's growing. Um, and there's room for everybody to specialize. And then Elizabeth, our other partner, does all the weddings and events. And so she isn't growing flowers. She buys from me. She buys from her dad. She buys from other local growers. She gets the best flowers she could get. There's so much demand for flowers, and especially this year when the wholesalers had a lot of troubles, it was a great opportunity for local growers to get their foot in the door.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree.
Yeah.
I know when you go to localflowers.org, which is the ASCFG support website to get the word out for farmers, you get this map and it has these little tiny daisies I don't think I gotta say daisies that are just cover the map, and it looks like it's completely saturated. And then when you zoom in on certain areas, you realize, oh, there's only like 5 farmers, and then they each have their own niche and what they do. And so I think there's plenty of room. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And I feel like, a lot of it is just really trying to find what is that thing that will set you apart, and, Amaryllis, all these bulbs is such a great way. Plus you can extend your season. It's a win-win for sure. I wanted to add, and you've kind of mentioned a few, but I don't know if that was like the big ones, or I'm not sure. But over the years of business, what's like one major challenge that you've had to kind of tackle or overcome?
We've been in business so long. When you figure we started in 97, um, it's just how your business model changes and evolves, and how, if you have another partner like I did, how that relationship evolves as well. Because like I said, I worked in corporate America, and then it got to a time where we put in that second greenhouse because we couldn't meet demand for lilies, and then I had to step away, which which broke my heart. But you can't have two more than full-time jobs. And so I stayed in the business forcing spring bulbs, because we also force spring bulbs for tabletop bulb gardens. And then when I retired, then I could jump right back in and, start. I did sell a little bit at the market, but I decided I'm too old to sell at the market. I'm too old to spend my Saturdays doing that. But it's how your business will evolve. Because when you first start out, I mean, I wasn't thinking I would still be involved in flowers more than ever before at this point. I had no idea I would be on the board of the organization I so admired, let alone, the next role coming up. But I would say you've got to be open for opportunity, and to keep your head above water, and always keep looking around, see what other people are doing, see what works for you. Go see other farms. And to do that, you got to be a member of the Cut Flower Growers Association. Because like this year, when we couldn't do any kind of conferences, we've had these great farm tours, great tours. And that's a chance to go and see what other people are doing. And if you're not a member, or even if you are, put up your hand, contact the growers around you, and just do a meetup. See how everything's going, see how you can work together, see what each other is growing. Because I'm always happy to recommend another grower to a designer or a wedding planner. If I don't have, a million white dahlias or something like that, I want to help all the flower growers around here.
Well, it's so funny you say that because I've been on the road doing a few things, and I don't care where I've gone. I'm gonna look and see if there's any flower farmers in the area, and I have had the opportunities of just dropping in on several over the past month or two. Well, actually before COVID, and then a little bit last week. And I always learn stuff. I've ne- Everyone's always excited just to share what they're doing and to learn, and it's just a great thing. And so if you can, yeah, that's so awesome. Well, okay, so there's two things I want to tackle, and I know we're running out of time, but I want to. You just mentioned spring bulbs, and I know that that's another way to extend your season is by forcing spring bulbs. And a lot of people are buying bulbs right now. They're buying their daffodils, they're buying their tulips, they're buying, whatever. And any tips for doing that? I mean, I know that's kind of a huge topic for a handful of minutes, but I feel like while people are shopping for amaryllis, maybe they have the opportunity to also buy bulbs from other sources. So wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, and I think they're going to have a lot more luck getting spring bulbs to force. And we force about 6,000 fragrant spring bulbs for tabletop bulb gardens. Again, it's all for these tabletop bulb gardens. I force them in deep 6-packs, like what you get bedding plants in. That's what I also
Really?
force paperwhites in too. And the reason I do that is because you can, once you've put them through their cooling period and they've got all those roots there, you can pop them out and you can transplant them into any container, and you're the one that's choosing the look that you want. And so say you want to do, like I force like 6 different kinds or 7 different kinds of grape hyacinths. And I've got somebody who loves purples and blues. And so I can create a container garden that's all the hyacinths that are that color, and then all the grape hyacinths around it. And all I do is I pop them out and I put them in. So that's an easy way to force them. But the other thing that people should think about who's thinking about forcing spring bulbs for these bulb gardens is that choose bulbs, choose your varieties that all bloom early in the season. So that's what I do. I choose ones that bloom early to mid-season. So they would be blooming naturally in April to no later than mid-May, because they need the same amount of chilling period. And so then I don't have something that's going to try to be blooming, way later. I like to have them that all bloom about the same time, because that helps my choices when I'm potting them up. And then I also get bulbs that aren't going to be taller than 16 inches. And I get fragrant. I love multi-stem fragrance. And then we also do workshops in that, because people will come to you and they will pay good money to be able to choose from your bulbs, and they create their own spring bulb gardens. So that's, but you've got to put them through a cooling period, and it's probably going to be 10 to 12 weeks.
And I would imagine if you have later blooming varieties, they probably take longer to bloom. So your turnaround's not as quick.
Right.
Or as longer. Is what I mean.
Right. And you can get prepared bulbs from wholesalers a lot of times, and that just means that they've gone through some of their chilling. I mean, that's really, really common with tulips, which I don't include a lot of tulips in my gardens, because one of the things I tell people is that they could take it after it blooms in the house, they can plant them out in their yard, and they'll rebloom next year. Tulips to me are not that reliable. So, but I use a couple of tulips, like the multi-stem ones and the double earlies, because they're so pretty.
I know. So that's really great. And what tends to be the most popular spring bulbs? I mean, you said tulips, and I know down here tulips don't usually rebloom very well, but
no, they're awful.
Yeah.
I love grape hyacinths.
I do too.
They're so pretty, and I get the white ones, and I get all the different I would say flavors, but colors. I also love the narcissus. And these are multi-stem early ones, and they are fragrant like springtime. And they are just, so those are really some of my favorites. When I can get the multi-stem hyacinth, which by the way, I couldn't this year, it's much harder to get. It's the most expensive spring bulb I will have. But it sends up multiple stems, and they're much smaller. And they're just a delight to have.
Well, I want to make sure that we take a hot minute here and talk about the ASCFG a little bit. I know you are filling some huge shoes, and no pressure, but yeah, I know, and I just thought, coming up. If people haven't joined yet, or if they didn't know about it, do you mind sharing like the benefits? I could go on and on, but I know that because you are actually a grower and have grown for years, the impact for you personally is probably way greater than for me. So.
No, I probably for both of us about the same. It has meant the world to what we were able to learn about and try. And so when I first joined in 2000, and when I saw in Texas what the Arnoskis were doing, I thought, well, we ought to be able to do that in Kentucky, I'll tell you that. And so I came back. The association exists to support each other through education and community and research. And that's what we focus on. Last year, I think it was last year, or possibly into 2019, we had our first strategic plan, which it's been years since we have been doing that. But one of the things that we're focusing on is education. And in the last, since COVID, we of course couldn't meet in person. Right. But we've done so much, we've learned so much about virtual meeting. And we also know that people are itching to get together again, which is why the farm tours were so great. But so the reason I think that anybody who's contemplating being a grower, or if you're a florist or designer thinking about doing more of your own growing, which we're seeing a lot more of, it's $195 a year. And you can send any regional director an email and they'll send you a discount code for $50 off your first year, including me. I'll give it to you because we want people to try it. Because once you're a member, you can delve into the treasure trove of our past conferences and growers meetings, looking at all of those presentations, watching the videos. And so if you were interested in Amaryllis, for example, you can go back and look at my Facebook Live presentation. We also have our own closed Facebook group that I did on Amaryllis and paperwhites. You can go back and look at the presentation, at the presentations I did, which were demos. You can have my list of what I grow, how I do it, and what kind of containers I do. And that's just an example from Amaryllis. You can get that kind of information about anything related to flower farming. So that is a really big reason. We also do a quarterly publication, which is a full color magazine. Regional directors write a quarterly article each time, but you have access to all of those and you have access to a lot more. I mean, we have mentor programs, we have scholarships. It will jumpstart what you do. And that's what it did for us in 2000 when I joined.
Yeah, and to me, when you're a part of something like that kind of organization, it really helps because sometimes as a grower, you kind of feel isolated. You kind of feel alone.
Yes.
Or it's kind of like, oh, I screwed up, and you kind of beat yourself up, and you realize everyone screws up. Everybody makes mistakes, and that's right. And that's what's so great about learning from other people that have done it before us. And I know when we interviewed the Arnoskis early in the season, I think we weren't recording this conversation at the time, but we were talking about just that need because so many times, people are making mistakes as new growers that this resource could help save them so much time, especially when you think about a year of growing something. Wouldn't it, who knows how much more profitable you would be just with that resource. So I just can't say enough good stuff about it, and I'm excited to have your first interview before you become. I mean, I feel like I have an exclusive here. I'm so excited. So
well, one of the things that I really want to try to focus on too is our seasoned growers, because all of the people that have been part of the association for so long, how can we be of service to them? What can we provide them? Because it's not just the new growers, because the new growers can learn about all the content that we have on the website and all of that. They can learn a lot, but how do we keep this really relevant and helpful to the Arnoskis, for example?
Yeah.
Or to
Amen.
Mima Davis, or to all the people that have been so helpful to so many people for so long. So that's, I think, a challenge that we're going to have going forward. We can't lose them.
No, we can't. They're too valuable, and they've done so much already for our industry. And they're such a resource, and they're just, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm excited to hear that. That's really awesome. We always end with advice questions, and I always think it's silly. And I always say this too. I always feel silly because you've given so much great advice. But I was just wondering, from your point of view, what is something you'd really like to share as a takeaway?
Of course, I knew you were going to do that, so I've given it a lot of thought, and I've thought about this a lot because it could be, grow big, knock people, off their, just knock their socks off, all that kind of stuff. It could be, but then this morning I came up with it, and it was some advice that was given to me in my corporate job that I've used, and I also use it in the flower world too, because it is that you can do anything. but you can't do everything.
Mm.
Because so many times, and we've maybe heard this before, and I would tell people even at work, because you've got so many demands on you, you've got so many priorities and you've only got a certain amount of your time that you can give. And so you can do anything, but you've really got to focus on what it is that, you can be great at and be really good at that. And that can change over time. It doesn't need to be the same, for the rest of your life. And so, like, I was thinking about that even with being asked to run for this president's role. And I thought, I am not the best grower at all. I'm not a great designer. I'm not. And then I thought, but what I like to do is to connect people. I like people to learn from each other. And so, maybe I can help do that. And I don't worry about the other stuff. I let that go. And so whenever I see so many growers, I see this on the Facebook group right now. I see this in person. They are worn out. They're so stressed. They're looking at all of their dahlias that didn't perform. Like mine. And it makes you feel like such a loser. And don't do that to yourself. Just try to focus on a few things and be really good at that and learn as you go. So just keep in mind, you can do absolutely anything, I guess within reason, but don't try to do everything that there is.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I feel like so many times, especially because of social media, we all feel like we're supposed to be doing all these things, including social media. And yeah, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother craziness. But yeah, that's crazy. But thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and then you'll see why in a minute.
Okay.
I know earlier you were showing me some great books, and I'm curious, what books do you recommend for someone wanting to dive into this topic?
Well, and I did show this in some of my past presentations, but if you're interested in forcing, this out of print Smith and Hawkins book, Forcing, is so good, because it was one of the first ones I got, and it's all about forcing, everything from, hyacinths to branches to everything that you want to force. It's really pretty.
What is that?
That is, these are geraniums.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that pretty? But it's how to force like all kinds of things. So I've had this book from the very beginning, and it is out of print, but I think you can still find that on probably Etsy. There's another one, the indoor potted bulb, and this one is by Rob Proctor. Another one that is about forcing all great things indoors. This one is a pretty Amaryllis book. And it was the one that originally showed me that inside the bulb, I'm not going to find that picture, but inside the bulb is already the buds, already the blooms. And so that's another reason why the bigger the bulb, the bigger the show. Oh, here it is, inside of Amaryllis.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that makes it so you really can't fail. There's books that you can buy from the library, like this one, Art Wolk, Bulb Forcing. And this is where, I don't grow ranunculus and anemones anymore because I don't have a high tunnel, and the low tunnel was just too much trouble. But when I was doing it, this one showed me how to sell them as potted plants, the ranunculus. And so
wow.
I did that 1 year, and the very first person bought every single pot I had.
What?
And they weren't cheap. And then the best one, the creme de la creme, is this Holland Bulb Forcer's Guide.
Oh my gosh, that was like a textbook.
It is. It is a textbook. This guy has passed away. And so if you can find one of these things, it is everything about everything related to forcing bulbs. When I got it, I think I paid $150 for it, When I showed it at one of my ASCFG presentations, people went online and it was like $750 now. And Bailey Hale,
Yeah.
during the, we had a special grower school at the end of January or February. He actually gave away 2 of these. So if you can find it.
Wow. That's awesome. Okay, great.
So
Yeah.
it's way more than I'll ever understand.
Well, those are great. Well, Val, this has been such a great time of information, and I really hope that it encourages a lot of people to extend their season, and to go check your course out at thegardenersworkshop.com. It's because it's unbelievably valued. How much is your course?
It's $50.
Yeah.
3 hours,
And
like 8 sessions. It took me months to do that. And you see everything that I do and what I know. And it's a lot cheaper than coming here for a workshop with me.
yeah. And plus do you give like sources or that kind of detail too, so that way people can hit the ground running?
Yep, I give everything, but I don't talk about pricing in that. But I give all the sources and I give you all of my handouts, because one of the keys to success is to have great growing advice for your customers. So they are in
Oh,
there
wow.
as well. I also show you the varieties that I was growing. And so just to give you an idea, I mean, that doesn't mean you should use those, but it's everything that I know about forcing amaryllis and paperwhites.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. I've really enjoyed it.